This program is brought to you by Emory University.
On March 26, 2013, the Center for Faculty Development and Excellence at Emory University hosted a discussion titled Social Media and Public Scholarship. The panelists examined how platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and blogs can increase the impact of scholarship beyond the academy, and how to negotiate the risks of using them. The speakers were Bana Westcote, an archaeologist and professor of art history, Roopika Risam, a graduate student in English at Emory and assistant professor of world literature and English education at Salem State University as of fall 2013, and Shannon Palma, a staff member in the Center for Women at Emory and a PhD alumna in Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. In this video, Roopika Risam describes how she uses Twitter to augment her scholarship.
My name is Roopika Risam, and as Allison had said, I'm a doctoral candidate in the English department, and I've had some success in using Twitter to build a social network and to disseminate scholarship. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why I use Twitter, how I use it, how you can get started using it or building your own networks, and then also some results that I've had in terms of my scholarship from using Twitter. I'm curious, how many of you have used it before? Okay, so if you are a Twitter user, there should be a first page of my presentation, which is not coming up, but if you want to tweet about this talk, you can use the hashtag SNAPS, pound SMAPS for social media and public scholarship. So I am perfectly comfortable having you tweet about my talk, and that's something that when I talk a little bit about the ethics of tweeting talks, you'll see why I think this is kind of funny. So Twitter is an online social networking site that came into existence in 2006, and it allows users to share 140 character messages that are called tweets. And so here is an example of a tweet that I posted the other day, which was a link to an article from Inside Higher Education, and so I wrote a little blurb about what it was, posted the link, and shared it with my Twitter network. Twitter currently has more than 500 million registered users tweeting about anything from their academic work to what their cat ate for breakfast, or celebrities tweeting about their lives or their promotions. One of the most successful celebrities on Twitter is actually Kim Kardashian, who uses it to promote her various projects. And so, it really, you have the potential to reach a lot of people, and it also has a number of useful functions for scholarship. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So I first joined Twitter in the spring of 2007. I was working at Georgetown University at the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship, and we were on the forefront of academic technologies or any kind of technologies. And so our bosses said, here's this new thing called Twitter, use it. And so we tried. And what I found then was that there wasn't really a critical mass of people using Twitter. I didn't really know who I was supposed to be following or why I would want to. And that was something that I found alienating about Twitter, and so I stopped using it. I ended up coming back in 2009, and I started using it more avidly then, because by then a number of fellow academics that I knew had started tweeting more, and at that point I was in Washington, D.C. for the summer, and I was disconnected from my networks here at Emory. I was writing my dissertation. I had some of my friends were still in DC, but I didn't really have an academic community. And so what I found is when I got back on Twitter, started talking to colleagues of mine who were avid tweeters, linking up with the people they knew and participating in conversations there, I found an outlet for talking about my work among scholars of African American and post-colonial literatures that I wasn't able to find at that moment in my personal life. So here are some reasons why tweeting is a good way to build an academic network. First of all, you can connect with new colleagues. I have people I now collaborate with who I only knew from Twitter. Some of them I've met now, some of them I haven't even met, but I've got to know them through Twitter, through sending these 140-character messages, either about what I'm working on or what I'm reading, or reading about articles they're posting that they found really interesting, and sharing information and building our connections that way. It also allows you to cultivate academic networks across the world. So you're not limited by the geography of your institution, and instead there's all these people out there potentially to talk to. You can also share ideas and reading material with the public. So by now, not everybody who I interact with on Twitter is an academic. Originally, it was a group of grad students, and from there, it was a larger group of alternate academics or alt-ac people, professors, lecturers, instructors, but now it's also sort of random people who are interested in following whatever it is that I post, and so they follow and interact, and it's interesting because it's sort of a constant stream of information that comes at you, and so trying to manage that is one thing, but you have the opportunity to have people draw your attention to articles you might not have seen, or new books that are coming out, and new networks of potential colleagues to work with. Twitter is also a great way to ask for feedback and engagement with for your research, to throw out an idea. After Django Unchained came out, a number of us thought we might want to talk about it, who work on African American literature, and at that point I thought, I'd like to teach a class on slave revenge fiction, and so I tweeted about that, and I had all these people writing back and saying, oh, here's a text you could use, or here's how you could develop a course like that, or that would be a great conference panel. And so there are ways in which that's a really helpful way to get some feedback and to hear what people are interested in, and if you're a fairly generous tweeter in terms of interacting with other people, it's similar to Facebook. People interact with you as well. And also, it's a great place to trade tips and ideas for effective teaching. So just the other day, I saw somebody who was teaching an online composition course next fall saying, oh, what are some resources that you like? When I was trying to figure out how to use Prezi to do this presentation, I tweeted, does anybody know how to use Prezi? Because it's kind of stymieing me at the moment. And so somebody tweeted me a link, and so I watched the link. And after watching the link, I still don't understand how to make a Prezi, so I had to ask some people. But there was the thought that counted. So in terms of teaching, crowdsourcing material, sending out a question to a large group of people that, if you have some followers, is a really good way to kind of pool your collective knowledge. So I want to talk a little bit about how to build an academic community on Twitter, because I know from my personal experience using Twitter the first time was not knowing what to do. And the problem at that point was that Twitter was so new that there just weren't a lot of academics on Twitter that I knew how to find. There weren't people I personally knew who were using it, and so I didn't really have a way to get into it and to find people to interact with. So by about 2009, that had changed. So what I recommend you do is to find colleagues you know who are on Twitter and follow them. And what you find when you find people this is mine, my Twitter page. Everybody has little bios, and usually we identify our rank and our affiliation, sometimes our research interests or a website. So you can look at these little bios and find out of your friends and find out what they're interested in. You can then click on their followers or who they're following and get to a list of people, and often you'll be able to tell what they're interested in and if you have shared interests, or you can just click on their name and see what they tweet about. That's usually what I do. Usually I click on their names and I see, oh, did they tweet about anything in the last couple of days that I find interesting. And if it is, I'll follow them, and if not, I just don't bother. So you can look on anybody's list. This is from my follower list the other day. These are some people who had followed me, and so you can see up here you'll have people identifying themselves as journalists, editors, doctoral candidates, ancient Greek philosophers, and so forth. So you know what they're interested in if you potentially want to follow them and interact with them on Twitter. The other thing you can do is look at lists of users that have been created by Twitter users. And so if you know people and you click on their Twitter page, there'll be a link that says lists. And it's a little bit of a hidden thing. I don't know if people use it as widely as they could, but I checked yesterday, I was listed in like 70 lists or something. And these are just a smattering of them, because people want to be able to easily follow a narrow list of people, so everybody who's interested in African American Lit, they put on one list. And so if you find that list or find you're on that list, you can click on it and look at it and see who these other people are and what they're working on, and if that's something that's potentially interesting for you. But Twitter has those positives, particularly in terms of engagement and networking, but it also has some downsides, some of which I ran into this year in the fall. But in terms of general difficulties, there's often the question of your tone, which is something that we deal with electronic media, whether it's an email we sent, we didn't mean for it to sound snarky and it sounded a little snarky to someone else, or trying to figure out if somebody's tone has a certain value in terms of how they're communicating with you. So there's that difficulty. Being limited to 140 characters is also something that can be difficult, particularly for those of us who like to go on and on and on. But it's I've found it to be a very useful task in trying to communicate an idea in 140 characters, because it can help you sort of be a more effective communicator as well. Another potential issue is improper attribution of ideas, in terms of, you have to kind of follow the trail on Twitter to see who's been retweeted, whose idea was it that's been circulated around, and have people been correctly attributing your work. This is something I've been frustrated about because I've been working on a project with a colleague, and the project keeps getting attributed to the colleague and not to me, but she's very good about intervening and saying, well, it's Roopika's as well. And then, of course, ethical concerns. And this is where I was saying that it was important for me to tell you that you could go ahead and live tweet my talk, is because what ended up happening last fall is Josh Guild, who's a professor at Princeton, wrote this tweet, and it says, still waiting on that ethics of live tweeting in the academy convo or conversation. And what ended up happening was, when he had written this, it had been a weekend where there were about 3 or 4 conferences at the same time, and often now at conferences we have people sitting there in the audience tweeting from the talk or talking about the talk on Twitter. And so Josh Guild raised the important question about what are the ethical imperatives of doing such a thing. So if it isn't expressly sanctioned by the speaker, is that okay? If this speaker has asked you not to tweet, what does that mean? And so it exploded among a group of academics on Twitter, and it was all anybody was talking about for 24 hours, is this back and forth about, do we do this? What should we do? Some people were saying, never live tweet anything, even if somebody asks you to. Somebody was saying, always live tweet everything, even if the person doesn't want it to. And then most people were in between. This actually wound up in an article in Inside Higher Ed on this controversy called the academic Twitterazzi, and it went into a number of the various arguments about live tweeting from conferences. And one of the things it also did was it quoted me. And it was quoting me because of my Twitter presence. But originally, the quote wasn't attributed to me. It was attributed to Mark Sample, who's a professor at George Mason University. And so that was one of the issues that you have with Twitter, because if you don't carefully follow the chain of information, you can misinterpret who said what. And it becomes a problem when a site that supposedly are journalists go ahead and make that error as well. So Mark Sample kindly jumped on there and wrote at length, and this is just a small clip from it, but he said that the issue and the error, confusing the two of us, says it illustrates the most significant problem that arises from using Twitter for scholarly communication. It is of accuracy and attribution. And so he goes on to talk a little bit about how my words were attributed to him. And so, even though there are those issues, I've found that Twitter has had results for my scholarship that have far outweighed the negatives. Simply finding people to collaborate with is something that Twitter has been very useful for. So currently I'm working on a collaborative article that's actually on Twitter and on using Twitter to create academic networks for women of color. That's an article I'm working on with a group of people who mostly I met on Twitter, and we've been able to collaborate using Google Docs to work on an article. With a different group, we've had a conference presentation accepted for the Digital Humanities 2013 conference, looking at cultural studies and how we can use it to analyze digital spaces. And in general, using Twitter has shifted my academic work towards the direction of the digital humanities, which is looking at the relationship between digital cultures and digital media and literature and other humanistic disciplines. And so that's something that I've developed through my Twitter engagement as well. And then finally, I have started working on a pretty large-scale project that's purely the result of Twitter, called the PostColonial Digital Humanities website. And so after that October Twitter fiasco about academic conferences, I began tweeting with Adeline Coe, who's a professor at Richard Stockton College in New Jersey. And we both realized that we were interested in the relationship between postcolonial studies and the digital humanities. And so we began using the hashtag #DHPOCO for digital humanities postcolonial in our Twitter feeds. And when you use a hashtag and somebody clicks on it, they can access every tweet that has engaged that tag. So Adeline and I started using DHPOCO to see if it would catch on and to see if there was interest around our networks in post-colonial digital humanities. And we found that people started using it, and it worked out pretty well. What ended up happening is we then subsequently met at MLA at our major convention and decided that we wanted to take this a little bit further. So we began by starting a Tumblr site on post-colonial digital humanities, where we would collaboratively post different links or photos trying to outline what we thought it was. We also started creating comics using Bitstrips, which is now integrated with Facebook, to express some of the ideas that we thought were important for post-colonial digital humanities. And this was actually, we were written up in Color Lines this morning, and they asked us to do a cartoon in honor of Chinua Achebe. So we put that together. And then we launched recently the Post-Colonial Digital Humanities website, in which we have posts and hopefully soon we'll have submissions that explore what Post-Colonial Digital Humanities is. We're kind of creating it as we go along, and so this is sort of some of the work that we're trying to do, and that's at dhpoco.org. So I'll stop there, but hopefully I've given you a little bit of a sense of how to leverage Twitter to develop your network and and some of the interesting results that can come out of it. So thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.